Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. So wrote Mark Twain in The Innocents Abroad, which he first published in 1869. And it's a statement that I wholeheartedly agree with. It was true then, and it's true now. I'm lucky enough to have travelled a lot. It's not a privilege that I take for granted. With every new country I visit, I learn something new. With every new country I visit, I meet different peoples. I become less ignorant, more curious, more interested. I learn that underneath the cultural differences of dress, religion, landscape, that we all want for very similar things, whether it be stability, education for our children. We like the same things, or care for the same people, our friends and family, and we laugh about the same things. I learn that we're not so very different. Travel gives us a different sense of perspective. We see lives and scenarios through the eyes of others. I remember when I was traveling from Mali through Burkina Faso to Benin, I was fascinated by my driver's reaction when we arrived at the Atlantic Ocean. He was absolutely terrified. He wouldn't go near the sea. He'd never seen it before. He described it as Le Lac Fâché, the angry lake. Yet he was really intrigued by it, and he asked me to go and get a bottle of this water, this salty water, so he could take it home to his family and friends in landlocked Mali. Travel breaks down barriers. It changes our perception, our prejudice. Take, for example, this girl. Where do you think that she might come from in the world? Any guesses? A silent audience. Perhaps Eastern Europe? Would it surprise you if I said that she comes from Pakistan? That she's a Kalash Kafir in the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, arguably one of the most stunning places in the world. And so too with these girls. You travel to Iran and you realise that it's not about white-bearded mullahs, that about 60% of the university students are female. And many of the girls, such as these two here, wear their hijab, their hair covering, as far back as decently possible. They smoke shisha and they spend all their time on their mobile phones. Not dissimilar to my daughters, the mobile phone bit, that is. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you on a journey around the world to different destinations, and in so doing, try and show you that we live in a wonderfully diverse world, and that we should embrace that diversity. According to statistics, Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world, and the press continue to paint a very negative image of it. Yet statistics don't account for the friendliness of the people, and in particular, the Waderidge, one of the last great nomadic tribes of Africa. And every year, after the rains, the Waderidge gather for a ceremonial festival called the Gerewol. It's a celebration of male beauty. The men, they paint their cheeks red, they blacken their lips with kohl, and so too their eyes, to emphasize the whiteness of their teeth and their eyes. They look striking. And then over a series of days, they click, they hiss, they chant, and they go into these dances. It's very frenetic, very energetic, and sometimes even they go into a trance-like state. It was a privilege to be there, but for me it was the highlight. There was this old woman coming and tugging at my elbow. She wanted me to take part. She was sad that I was by myself. She wanted me to enjoy the happiness of the tribe, the kindness of strangers. Friendliness is how I'll also remember Papua New Guinea. Yet ask people to describe PNG, and they come back with sort of primitive, uncontacted tribes in traditional costumes such as these. But such stereotypes, they're outmoded. The reality is far more prosaic. And when I was there, I was met with handshakes everywhere, welcome, and people asking me to sort of come into their houses, smiles and laughter. Yes, there's an undertone to PNG, but it doesn't deserve the aggressive stereotypes that it has. So too with North Korea. Yes, there are depressing stereotypes. There is no choice. There's no advertising, there's no shop signs. The propaganda of these posters is their equivalent. There's no individuality. Uniform is de rigueur, whether it be school or military, whether it be ancient costume or the ubiquitous jumpsuits they wear. And everywhere you will see statues of Kim Il-sung. He's treated as deity. He died some 20 years ago with these vast, great statues in these huge, great squares. Bizarrely, in spite of its problems and in spite of its lack of freedom, Laughter is how I remember North Korea. Whether it be the laughter of the official here, the DMZ, the demilitarized zone at the border with South Korea, or my guide, Miss O, or indeed the guards at the border as I was on the train leaving from North Korea into China. These guards, they stop, they look at your cameras. They want to make sure that you haven't taken any unflattering photographs of North Korea that portray it in a bad light. If they see them, they delete them. And I suddenly remembered I had a photograph of me standing under a statue of Kim Il-sung and sort of mimicking his pose, and I was worried that it might cause offence. And of course, the guard, he finds this photograph. He looks up at me, and he bursts out laughing. He thought it was hilarious, absolutely hilarious. And when showing it to everybody else in the carriage, all the other North Koreans. So yes, North Korea is a very repressive regime, but that doesn't mean that everybody in North Korea necessarily agrees with the regime. Once when I was in Sudan, I was accosted, I was accused of supporting the Iraq War because I was British. I had to explain that I didn't vote for the then government, and I'd actually marched against the war. I didn't like being accused or associated with something my government believed in. And so too many people around the world. They don't want to be judged by their government. They are individuals. Travel gives us this sense of perspective. We see lives and scenarios through the eyes of others. Travel, it challenges us to let go of what we're certain of. Travel encourages us to appreciate, to understand diversity, and to embrace it. Mongolia is a country of about 1.6 million square kilometres. So it's about 6 times the size of the UK, and it's got a population of 2.8 million, of which 60% are in the capital, Ulaanbaatar. And thus there's vast swathes of nothingness over the whole of Mongolia. And I headed into the far northwest of the country to a very remote region where horses were first domesticated and where falconry was invented. And it's also where, to this day, that the Kazakh eagle hunters still ride out on horses with their eagles, hunting foxes, rabbits, and marmots. I was dressed in my Gore-Tex, down, brand names, and there was Dalakhan, the eagle hunter, his face sort of wizened by the elements, resplendent in his fox fur jacket. On his arm is a 7-kilogram bird of prey, and it's always a she because the Kazakhs hunt with females because they're much bigger than the males. She is called Eagle number 7. Now this surprised me a little bit because Dalakhan was clearly very affectionate, very fond of his bird. So much so that he sleeps with it, literally. His wife on one side of the bed and the bird on the other. But he called it Eagle number 7 because like the 6 before it, he will release her, when she is 7 years old. So we head out into the wilderness, into the beckoning silence, the snow squeaking under hoof. And like a Sioux raiding party, we're gaining height, we're gaining vantage, until we're looking out. It felt like I was on the edge of the world. There's huge great plains in front of me. And at that moment, I didn't want to be anywhere else in the world. Eagle number 7, she's sitting there, she's scouring, she's scanning, she's looking for the slightest movement against the white of the snow. Her eyesight is 7 times greater than ours. Suddenly she sees something. A cry goes up, she's released, she swoops down very fast. A rabbit's seen running desperately. She's closing in, and then nothing. Predators are not as successful as our TV screens would have us believe. And indeed, the success rate of an eagle is about the same as a lion, about 25%. But the uncertainty of that strike rate doesn't stop Dalakhan going out hunting. The uncertainty of whether it's a successful hunt or not didn't stop me from enjoying that experience, from savouring that moment, from wanting to be nowhere else on the planet. We cannot hope to succeed if we're afraid of the outcome, if we're afraid of failure. We have to embrace uncertainty and not always play it safe. If you ever go on safari, I would urge you to go walking. You won't see as much, but you will learn so much more. If I was in a vehicle, I wouldn't see the ants, let alone notice the difference between them. I'm sure you can notice the difference, that the ones on the left, they're dispirited, dissolute, they're wandering around aimlessly. They've had an unsuccessful hunt. Whereas the ones on the right, they've had a successful hunt. Their pincers have got termite body parts in them, And you can see it if you're actually there. You can see that they're pumped up, they're engaged, they're walking with pace. On foot, you won't see as much, but if you do see something, it's a far more visceral experience, especially if it's a cat. And I was lucky enough to see and literally bump into a leopard. And for about 3, 4, 5 seconds, there was a face-off between us. The electricity was just, it was magical, the uncertainty of that moment, of this face-off with this leopard. It was humbling, and nature is humbling, and so too travel, especially somewhere like Kodiak Island, which is the Emerald Isle of Alaska, and it's the home of the Kodiak bear, which is the world's largest carnivore. And thus I was a little surprised, but excited, when my guide Jen said, right, let's go walking. When we're walking around, she's clapping her hands the whole time. She's going, hey bear, hey bear. She didn't want to surprise or bump into a bear. But that's the joy of going somewhere like that, a great wilderness area. You never know what's going to be around the corner. The uncertainty is the thrill of the chase. We saw evidence of bear everywhere. There's scat of different size and consistency, huge great bear, paw prints, and salmon, which the bears are feeding on everywhere, the detritus of salmon. And of course, eventually we did also see bears, and especially one sub-adult male who kept on coming closer and closer and closer until he was literally a matter of feet away from us. I was transfixed in awe at this young bear in front of us. The intensity was tangible, and I stood so very still. Jen was remarkably calm throughout. She was using her voice, the tone of her voice, to control the movements of that bear. And the bear listened to her. The bear responded to her and reassured the bear moves on. The intelligence of a bear is somewhere between that of a very smart dog and a primate. And like humans, the intelligence of a bear varies from individual to individual, and also is based on their life experiences. In front of me was a very intelligent, very curious bear that defies its aggressive stereotype. I think we should be like those bears. We should be curious. We should be collectors of experiences. The penultimate country that I would like to take you to is Guatemala. It's a kaleidoscope of colour, whether it be the dazzle of the hummingbird to the traditional garb of the Mayan women. And there's colour in the people, but especially in the guides, and especially this man here, Carlos. Let me give you an insight into Carlos's story. He was born in 1976 and had a carefree childhood growing up in the jungles of Yucatan. That was until the morning of Friday the 2nd of May, 1984, when there was a knock on the door. Guatemala, at that time, was embroiled in a brutal civil war, and political disappearances were commonplace. So Carlos's father was taken away, never to return. Carlos says that the image of his father standing there at the door, looking back at Carlos, remains seared in his memory. He will never forget it. But he will also say that his father was saying something silently to him. His father was saying, Carlos, I'm going away for a short time, but I will be back. In the meantime, you are now the master of the household. Carlos, an 8-year-old boy, made a silent promise to his father to do just that. So Carlos waited. The days turned into weeks, but still his father didn't return. Eventually, Carlos resolved to leave the village and walk through the jungle to a place called Tikal. It took him about a week. It's only about 25 kilometers, but he was an 8-year-old boy surviving with his slingshot and what he could kill. He arrives in Tikal where there's a road to San Benito and a different life. Carlos had never seen a car before. Did that faze him? Was he uncertain of what to do next? No, he hitched a lift to San Benito. And in San Benito was the school. He'd never seen a school before. But again, he wasn't unfazed by that. He wasn't unsure of what to do next. He approached the teacher, persuaded the teacher to allow him to enroll in the school, and he went on to study, and over the years he passed his exams and then self-funded his way through university. The next significant day in Carlos's life is the 30th of December 1996. And that's the day after the Guatemalan peace accords were signed. That's the day that Carlos realized his father wasn't coming back. Hope shattered, his resolve was redoubled to look after his family. So he trained to become a guide. And he's gone on to be, in my opinion, not only one of the best guides within Guatemala, but the whole of Central America. And in so doing, he supported his family and also the wider community in Yucatan. So much so that in the local language, they call him Caliche. Caliche means shade. I think that Carlos has more than lived up to that silent promise that he made to his father. Travel it's very humbling. It shows us that we don't always know the path ahead of us, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. The final destination that I'd like to take you to is Chad. Now, Chad is a space in the map in the middle of Africa that is little known, and then sadly, as a result, little understood. And many people are very uncertain of it, uncertain about travelling there. I would urge you to think a little bit differently and travel to the remarkable region of Nyeri in the north of the country, which has got to be one of the most stunning desert regions anywhere in the world, or to Sukuma, which is a little-known park in the southeast corner of Chad. It's a park where the accommodation is simple. It has no walls. It's raw, which makes the other roar, the roar of the lion, all the more visceral when you hear it at night. But you don't go to Sukuma for the elephants. You go for the Ellies. These are the poster boys of Sukuma. Now, over the centuries, they've been hunted on horseback with spears, and the defense mechanism of these elephants was quite unique, but they used to gather into this tight little ball, which helped them against the horses' spearmen and spears. But when it came to semi-automatic weapons in the 1960s, this was devastation for the elephants. In the early 1970s, there were thought to be about 300,000 elephants in the greater region around here. Now, there are just 450 elephants left in Sukuma alone. Thankfully, that terminal decline in the elephant populations has been stopped by the wonderful work of a great organisation called African Parks, and also by these guys, the rangers. But sadly, that's come with a price. In September 2012, for instance, there were 6 rangers who were at prayer one morning, they were ambushed, and they were all killed. And when I was there, I met a Frenchman who was ex-special services, who was working with the rangers, both to mentally, but also sort of physically, militarily, how to get over this. I said to him, what do you say to a group of men like this who are earning not very much in the middle of nowhere and have had all their colleagues killed in various incidents? He said to me, what I said between me and them will remain between us. But what I will say to you is we went into a room together and we cried and we cried and we cried. There are many remarkable men and women around the world who have a far less certain present and future than us, doing many remarkable things. The final image that I would like to leave you with is one of Idris. Idris is training to become a ranger. His father was killed in the line of duty, and I was worried that he wanted to become a ranger out of revenge. So I asked him, why do you want to become a ranger? And he said emphatically and quite simply, because of the elephants. Travel is about people. It's about people like Idris. Don't be driven by what scares you. Be driven by what inspires you. Be a collector of experiences. Thank you very much.